and welcome to this week's episode of Scottish Independence Podcasts. This week we're returning to a topic which we have spent a lot of time trying to get our heads around, as have most people in Scotland, I think, and it's to do with energy, and specifically the cost of energy. It's now a large part of the campaign for the Holyrood elections.
Yeah, well, a pretty large part of the whole of the UK, isn't it, actually? Well, I mean, everyone's talking about it now, and then the Iran eruption hasn't helped. But we have been thinking about it for a while, and
we'd collected up 5 or so burning questions that we really needed some help with. So we thought, we'll ask Craig Dalzell, he'll know the answer. It's such a big topic that it turned out that there was too much to cover in one episode. So rather than try and shoehorn important issues into an hour, we've split it into 2. So this episode, we've got Craig Dalzell trying to tackle some of our burning questions and explain to us some of how these complications work of what is a very complicated system. We've also got some content that came from a speech that John Swinney did, and also I believe she's a SNP candidate for Shetland, who's Hannah Mary Goodlad, who has got an interesting perspective because of that Shetland dimension. So the second programme, we will get on to Gordon McIntyre Kemp's petition on energy, which has got some fascinating results so far. That'll be a separate programme. And also we'll try and do a catch-up. It's a very fast-moving picture just now with everything that's going on in Iran, and the madness that is Trump's brain is, causing havoc with the oil prices and the gas prices. So there's a bit of focus now on options for how the cost of gas might feature into the energy mix. So we'll come on to that on a different episode because it just deserves a bit more time than we could do it all in one episode.
So when we were trying to get our head around these questions, it just seemed like we're in the middle of a maze, and that's why the programme is called The Energy Maze.
I love that picture. And if Craig wants a second career as a game show host, there you go.
Yeah, it's great, actually. I really like that.
Just before we get into the discussion with Craig, we found it really helpful just to have a visual reminder of what the energy market actually is, the various parts of it. So we're just going to quickly take you through that just in case you're struggling with it.
If you start at the top left of that, there's producers and there's generators. Now, producers are the fossil fuel people, so think oil rigs, gas rigs. That's not energy in itself. It has to probably go to a power station, and then the power station generates the electricity. So that's all that bit. The electricity has to start moving, and that's where we have long-distance transmission, and that's run by the national grid. The next is local distribution. So that's where local network companies come in. For Scotland, it's Scottish Southern Energy, that one. They're our local distribution kind of company. It might be different companies in different local areas. They don't do it for nothing. There's a profit margin in that, really.
None of these people do it for nothing. They're all getting a profit.
And then you get to the actual suppliers. So think, the big 6, I suppose it always used to be, but, there are smaller people coming in as well. They supply it directly with us on a local grid. Most of the profit is gained by the producers and the generators. So hopefully that helps.
Welcome, Craig, back into the studio, one of our favourite guests. Thank you. Today's exam topic, Craig, is all about prices, electricity prices.
But I'm always thinking, how much simpler would it be if we just nationalised the lot? But yeah, it is a very, very complex area. And I guess really there's 2 parts in there that he talked about that are worth picking out, and that's the DNO, the distribution network, that is really the kind of local side, how the power gets into your town and then into your house. But you've got the TNO, the transmission side as well. That's more the long distance. That's the big pylons running from Scotland down to London, basically. And those are the 2 areas where you tend to see much of the debate around pricing when you're talking about Scotland being ripped off, especially Scotland's paying the highest prices or not benefiting from the renewable transition. Because a lot of this was set up a long time ago. A lot of this was set up in the previous energy age when transmitting electricity was relatively expensive, but transmitting coal via train was relatively cheap. So the grid in many ways was designed for that age of coal and then later the age of gas when it could be piped. So that you would want to incentivize a system where the power stations were as close as you could get to your major population centres without necessarily covering them in too much soot. So this is why you get that system where if you want to build a new power plant, whether it's a coal power plant or whether it's a wind turbine, if you want to erect it near London, which is the major population centre for Great Britain, then you'll be subsidised to do it. Whereas if you want to put that same wind turbine in Scotland, or especially up in the north of Scotland, you'll have to pay quite a lot to get it connected to the grid.
So that's your grid connection charges, is it?
Yes, that's the grid connection charges, yeah.
There's a waiting time. Is that also true?
It's also true that the National Grid has not seen the investment that it needs to go through this transition. So you can only fit so much power down a single wire at a time. So if you connect too many generators to that wire, it melts. It can't handle it. And we're not rolling out those grid investments as quickly, grid reinforcements as quickly as we can. But we're also in that situation that we're essentially trying to flip the national grid on its head. As I mentioned there previously, all of the main big thermal power plants would have been further down south, closer to the areas of demand. But you can't move the wind. You have to put the generator where the wind is, and where the wind is in and off the north of Scotland. So having to build these massive big trunk lines to get that power down south, that's causing other political problems with people who don't really want to be living next to those massive big trunk lines. The consequence of that is we're trying to rebuild the grid for the new age while connecting things to it, and there's backlogs and bottlenecks all over the place.
I mean, the grid isn't a nationally owned setup now, is it? It's a private company. So the private company then presumably has just not been like as they are wont to do, hasn't been putting in the money.
The National Grid, NESO, was nationalised under Starmer. So it is back in UK hands, but there is still a massive private side of this as well, especially on the generation side and especially on the retail side.
So just of those different layers then, there's money at all stages then, is there? So that NESO, I didn't know that it had been nationalised, and good if it has, but presumably that requires investment in order to improve it. And then the transmission owners, is that where the private companies come in? That they're the ones who are selling it? Well, are they selling it into the market, selling it into the open market?
Wholesale market, presumably?
Wholesale market?
Yeah, selling it into the wholesale market, which then sells it into the retail market.
And then you've got the district network operators, who are they also privatised and they require a profit?
Yes.
And then you've got the retail who are privatised and they require a profit. So everybody's taking a cut of it until it gets to us.
Although I would say that the margins on the retail side, they tend to be very, very thin, which is why you often see those stories of power company goes bust, customers transferred to another one, because it really doesn't take much of a price spike to wipe out their margins and take them out of business. The real money is in the actual electricity generation. It's the people who own the wind turbines or who are drilling for oil. They're the ones who really make the money. Everybody else is just having to take a wee thin slice on top of that.
Right, that's really helpful to just get that a bit clearer in my head.
We know from analysis produced for Ofgem that a different policy approach would enable Scotland to have the lowest wholesale electricity prices in Western Europe. As we set out in the paper published today, by selling that low-cost electricity into other markets at a profit, by increasing storage capacity, including pump hydro storage, to end the folly of generators being paid not to produce electricity, and by removing unnecessary costs like the UK's nuclear levy, we can deliver big benefits here in Scotland. That includes being able to lower household electricity bills by over 1/3, a big saving for families across Scotland, offering the real hope that cost of living pressures will finally begin to ease. The opportunity to give communities a real stake and a share in the profits from the wind farms being built in their area. That will become a requirement of onshore developers to do so. And the opportunity to deliver a crucial competitive advantage for Scottish industry, for Scottish companies, and deliver savings for our hospitals and schools with their electricity costs cut by at least 1/3 too. Think what that will mean for our National Health Service. Less money spent on energy bills means more money to spend on doctors and nurses, on more operations and appointments. And have no doubt, a policy of low energy costs for Scottish businesses can be as transformational for our country and its prospects as the policy of low corporation tax was for Ireland.
If John Swinney says, with independence, we're going to have cut your bills by 1/3 or by 1/2, I've seen as well. Mm-hmm. Where does that happen when he doesn't own most of those bits of the market?
I'll be honest, I have no clue. I have no idea how he's come by that calculation of taking energy prices down by 1/3, especially given that the SNP don't have a policy of a national energy company that directly owns the assets. You know, a bit like the Wales now has a public energy company that is starting to develop sites to build nationally owned wind turbines. That's still not got Scottish government policy. I'm not sure how he gets down to the 1/3.
Yeah, I mean, unless they're going to either renationalise bits of that process or buy or acquire stakes on it. I've forgotten which country it was. Was it Norway or Denmark? It was one of the Scandi ones. Had a policy of every time they gave a licence out, they required, I think it was, say, 20% or something was to be owned by the state. So eventually they own most of it, if not all of it. But that takes a long time because these licenses are coming up every, 10 years or whatever for renewal. So if they're taking a stake every time, you can see how gradually they would increase the state's ownership. But we would have to start from scratch. And the only thing I can see that independence would allow us to do is actually own energy, because we would be free from the shackles of the Scotland Act, which prevents us. Is that anywhere close to the situation?
Yeah, I think it was Denmark you were talking about, the other ones that are wanting to try and get that 20% public ownership stake. And they have a slight advantage in that several of their energy companies are already publicly owned. So if that company wins the license, by default, they'll meet the target. Presumably the others would have to go through processes of either offering shares and stakes to the government, or maybe offering community ownership or things like that. So, yeah, I mean, we do have a plan, actually. Commonweal does have a plan for renationalising all of the renewable assets in Scotland.
Good. How long will it take?
It would take about 25 years, and it would cost you nothing. It would cost bill payers no more than they're already going to pay as part of the private plan.
Okay, and how does that work in a nutshell? What's it?
Essentially, because whenever the private developers put up a new wind turbine, they put the cost of the development onto your bill already. So you're already paying for the new developments. All this does is change who is paying the upfront cash from the private companies to the government. That money gets recouped from you, the bill payer, eventually. But what we want to do is, well, one, there's the side of new development should be developed by the Scottish Energy Company. Now, that could be a single company owned by Scottish Government ministers, the way ScotRail is. That is the thing that is expressly prohibited by the Scotland Act at the moment. It could be owned by local authorities. The national company could be owned by a consortium of all 32 local authorities. That's permitted. It could be 32 local energy companies. There are various other ways you can do that, but we could start now. The idea is, yes, new developments, as much as possible, should be developed by the public energy company. They would then be owned by it. But also, whenever a license comes up for an existing field, instead of it being relicensed to a private company, it should just be transferred to the public owner, the public company. Again, in a very similar way that ScotRail was renationalised, where it was taken from Abellio and given to a national operator.
Right, and so is every energy generator generating company at the moment, are they all operating on a fixed term license like that? Are all the licenses eventually going to come up for renewal?
Virtually all of them are on some kind of termed license. It's often 15 years, 25 years. Companies do try to push it. They want to see 40, 60, 99-year leases. But there are other ways as well. You can put conditions on these contracts where if the company doesn't meet certain sustainability goals or acceptable practice goals, you activate a break clause in the contract and take the assets off them. Again, just like ScotRail. Or you can look at what's going on with the first generation of wind turbines in Scotland just now, which is known as repowering. The turbines that were erected about 25 years ago are coming to the end of their useful life, but the developers are wanting to replace them with bigger, more efficient, more modern turbines. So you're taking a 4 megawatt turbine and you're replacing it with a 9 megawatt turbine. Mm-hmm. A lot of these licenses have a maximum ceiling on the size of the turbine that's allowed. So that 4 megawatt turbine might have a contract that says no more than 5 megawatts, for example. So if you want to put a 9 megawatt turbine on that site, you need a new license. Instead of giving the license to the private developer, you give it to the public energy company instead.
Right. So is that what GB Energy was originally punted to do? I know that I've noticed they've withdrawn 95% of its proposed plans, but was that the model for GB Energy?
It was the model we pitched for GB Energy. It's possibly not quite the model that came about, but it is that kind of idea. That GB Energy, I think, is more looking like an investment middle person or a strategic board of developers, which has a role. We've also pitched the idea of a Scottish Energy Development Agency that would identify the sites in Scotland where you would put the next turbine or the next solar panel. And sort of strategically place them around the country for best effectiveness. Now, that GB Energy could have a role in that. But yeah, I'm still to this day, I'm not entirely sure what they're actually doing.
Could I just ask, when you say strategically place them around the country, so I'm thinking you mean Scotland. Yeah. So is that then because you can start to use smarter grid options if you've got more of a production that fits with your local population or your local industry, then presumably you can start to put in a grid that works, it's smart. It doesn't, as much as possible, people living locally are taking electricity from what's produced locally. Is that part of that idea?
More or less. Right now, it's a complete Wild West out there. Yeah. A lot of the solar farms and onshore wind developments that are going up are, starting their life with a private developer going to a farmer and promising them a bucket full of cash if they rent out a field to them. But it's a case of, we'll ask 10 farmers and maybe 3 of them will accept and we'll move on from there. There's no strategic planning. It's all developer-led where they think they can get some profit out of it. Whereas a national strategic approach would be looking at say a local community, looking at the assets that it has. Is this an area that gets a lot of sun? Is that an area that has a lot of wind? Does it have potential for geothermal power, for example? And then assessing it against what is the best to put there. You might also do different things with the pricing model of how you connect to the grid. One of the schemes that we were heavily campaigning on was what's known as zonal pricing. Where you essentially you change the base price of electricity based on how much supply of electricity there is. So that would make prices up in the north of Scotland where there's a lot of wind turbines a lot cheaper than down south. You can do other things where you incentivize industry to move to areas where there is a lot of wind power. So you don't need to transmit that power long distances. You don't need to send those massive pylons up to take the electricity down south.
And does that also
mean all the jobs come from London to Scotland? But
But it does, presumably that also means you're not having to pay massive constraint payments to switch the things off when there's too much, because you've got something there locally soaking it up. Is that how it works?
Depends. The constraint payments are much more a storage issue. So we need much more in the way of batteries or hydroelectric or other forms of energy storage. But you can also imagine certain types of industry that are easier and more economical to turn on and turn off. So you turn them on when there's high demand, you turn them off when there's low demand. That's a much more nuanced and complex industrial strategy, and certainly private industry doesn't like that prospect of, well, maybe we're not allowed to make products this week because the price of energy has gone up. It's not even necessarily an inevitability with independence either, because there is the possibility, and there are good arguments for maintaining a single GB-wide electricity grid, the way that Ireland as a single grid between the Republic and Northern Ireland. If we don't want to do that, if we want to have a different arrangement, that does allow for more policy options. But if we want to maintain a single grid, then we do still have to have those negotiations with Westminster on how that's run. We might have a bit more power and a bit more say in how that's run, but that would still be the case. One thing that could happen very quickly is change the pricing structure of how the unit price is still linked to the price of gas. Because gas, especially when it's used as a top-up, turning on these fast peaker turbines, is a very expensive way to run electricity. But the way the pricing structure works, and this is a bit of an oversimplification, is if you have more renewable electricity out there than you have demand, your price is set by the renewables. But as soon as you start to have to turn on even one gas turbine, the price of all electricity, even the stuff that was generated by the wind turbines, has to be paid the gas price. You've seen that especially this week with the massive spike in oil prices and gas prices with Trump's invasion of Iran, where you've got countries in Europe that have a far deeper penetration of renewable electricity than we do, where prices are going incredibly volatile, where you might have one day when it's half a pence a kilowatt or half a cent a kilowatt, and then the next day it's 40 cents a kilowatt because they're hitting that gas threshold. I see it as well. As I mentioned, I'm on one of those variable tariffs, so I'm very sensitive to those days. I can see when the gas turbines are turning on. So fixing that and setting up a system where the price is based maybe on the average price of the aggregate mix of electricity would be one way of bringing those prices down far faster. Because quite frankly, renewable energy, and especially wind, especially solar power, are now the cheapest forms of electricity generation we have ever had. The revolution in solar over the past 2 decades has surpassed all expectations by orders of magnitude.
This business about when the gas price kicks in and then suddenly every producer's being given the gas price, the wholesale gas price. I mean, that only happens because of demand in England, isn't it? Was that just naive of me to kind of think, well, it's up to England. I mean, if they need to use gas, that's fine, but they'll need to pay for it. But we're not having anything to do with that. So that would get into a kind of two-tier, setup.
What you're describing there is the essence of zonal pricing. Where the price of electricity is you'd split the country up into multiple zones. It could be quite large zones. Scotland could be one. Essentially, if the north of Scotland is consistently overproducing electricity, which it would be because it's got so many wind turbines and not a lot of people, then the internal market for electricity within that zone would be vastly oversupplied. Basic economics, if supply is higher than demand, price goes down. Those areas would see very low energy prices, and they would be exporting a lot of energy that way. Whereas the places that have more demand than supply would see higher prices. Now, it's not a huge amount. It's in terms of, does this mean London's going to see a massive price hike? Less than you might think. It's I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head. I think it's something like for every £5 someone in Scotland would save, London might have to pay £10, £15, £20. But it's less than you might think. And anyway, when Ed Miliband dismissed the idea of zonal pricing, he said he did so because he didn't want to introduce a postcode lottery to the UK energy market. What he actually meant to say was he didn't want to correct the postcode lottery market that already exists that sees Scottish bills subsidise London bills.
Just coming back to how do our bills come down with independence? And I think I've heard Gillian Martin say, because we would own what we were exporting, which again, I don't think we would unless we're owning some of the transmission generators in the process. So maybe that's a long-term thing.
If we have nationalised the generators, then the profit made from those generators becomes a public asset.
Right. So
when I say nationalised, that might be a national company, that might be even down to community ownership. But that's basically that's the key here. Rather than, I mean, there are a lot of things we can tweak with the grid and pricing and things like that, and looking at the export-import market. But it's the energy generators that make the money. So it's the owners of those generators that make the money. That's the key thing to hammer home each time.
Yeah. Right. So when we say things like, and I have heard it said, well, England would be paying for the energy they consume rather than taking it for free from us, that actually isn't really the way it works now, is it? They don't, because they're having to buy it from the transmission generator.
That's almost imagining setting up a customs post on the pylons. That is not quite.
Well, that's good to get that clarified then. Yeah, this was from Believe in Scotland's campaign that I'm sure you'll know about it, Craig. You may even have signed up for it. We certainly did. This was where there was a petition going to all our elected representatives to do something about the standing charges, which we've just established is different to the zonal pricing. But even on the standing charges, this is electricity, and you've got Scotland in two chunks, both of which have got much, paying practically double what the London area is paying. And the only place that's higher than Scotland is North Wales, which is probably part of their argument for independence as well. But looking at those figures, Marlene and I both looked at our own bills, and neither of us are paying those amounts. So there's obviously something more sensitive once you get into it than just regional prices. So I got this email from my Lecky company that referred to this bit of the government, the UK government's website, that said, we said we would cut the cost of living, taking an average of £150 off energy bills from April. This will be done by ending funding for the energy company obligation scheme, whatever that is, and removing 75% of costs for the renewables obligation scheme. And Ofgem has confirmed the energy price cap will fall by 7%. So that all sounds great. But then I got something from my actual energy company saying, this is what you're going to save. I'm only saving 50 quid. And the reason that I'm only saving 50 quid is that the standing charge has actually gone up from 63 pence to 64 pence a day, although the unit rate has gone down slightly. Now that's 63 and 64 pence a day. 64 pence a day will be £234. The current one, 63 pence, would be £231. So that's already more expensive than those regional standing charges.
That's true. On the other hand, our standing charge is 51p a day, which, to me sounds like a lot, but actually that's only about 160, 170 pounds a year, which is down at the your map earlier, Fiona. That was what you paid if you were living in Hampshire. So it's 51p a day standing charge, and our unit rate is about 21p for kilowatt hour, which is a lot less than what you were paying. So we signed up for this, I think it was getting on for a year ago, and it runs through till for another year. So I think it was 18 months altogether. Yeah. So I'm here I am in Glasgow, and I'm paying a lot less than those average standing charges. So how does that work?
I mean, mine is a purely renewable tariff, and it's not on an 18-month contract. So that's two differences that perhaps get affected. I mean, mine is for gas from renewables and electricity from renewables, 100%. But it's still quite a bit more than yours, and they're both different from that map. So explain it, Craig.
What you're probably seeing is competition in the energy market.
Yeah,
a little bit of variation between retailers. As I say, my bill is probably not comparable to either of yours because it's because I'm on that variable rate. My standing charge is, I think, 62 pence a day. Right now, the unit rate is 44 pence a kilowatt, but that's because we're in that peak period right now. It was 22 pence for most of today, and I consider that quite high. Again, because Trump's blowing everything up. So I averaged over the course of last year a unit rate of about 17 pence, because I was able to do those load shifting and take advantage of those negative rates. So yeah, you're probably just seeing a bit of competition in the market there. Now we have argued against the concept of standing charges because they can be discriminatory, especially against very low income households, who, especially the ones who are self-disconnecting, literally turning their breakers off to save power. It also somewhat discriminates against very, very highly efficient houses who have managed to cut their overall energy use to a fraction of what most of us use, but are still having to pay this substantial standing charge. The traditional reason for the standing charge was mostly to pay for infrastructure costs, like the pylons. But you can see on that chart of the variable pricing that, there's an argument that if you're in the north of Scotland, then we have to lay more cable to get to your house, and that costs more. But if the turbine's also right next door, it sets up this bizarre situation where the grid is almost pricing itself on my wind turbine that's right next to me. What is the cost for it to send electricity down to London and then back up to my house? Because we just haven't started modernising not just the structure of the grid, but the way we actually pay for and generate electricity. We need much more of a strategic plan to this.
Does that mean also that your turbine is providing energy onto the open market, which you then buy back? So it doesn't actually matter that it's close to.
Correct.
Okay,
although you do get some situations where you can get like direct line connections. This is mostly for big companies. Your likes of Amazon might sign a direct contract with a local wind farm to provide power straight to them possibly without even connecting to the grid, and they get a preferential rate for that. We've argued for that to be made more possible and more easy, especially for smaller businesses as well, again, to try and incentivise industry to come to Scotland, but so far it only really tends to be there for the mega players. You can see this a lot with the AI data centres as well. They're so desperate for power, so hungry for power. They're even building their own dedicated power plants just for the data centres.
It's obviously more complicated than we can reduce to a nice little sentence, but I think the thing for me is still that in Scotland, our homes, our businesses, our services, our transport and everything is penalised because the standing charges are higher. And we're also penalised because of the grid connection charges when we try and do something about it. And we also don't have any control over things that we could do to make a difference. Is that a summary?
Yeah, it's a good summary, but with the extra addition that because we don't own any of the wind turbines, all the profits made for them go off elsewhere as well, often to foreign multinational companies or to publicly owned energy companies owned by other countries.
Right. The Canadian Teachers Pension Scheme, which seems to own everything. Okay, so really, so when it comes back to Mr. Swinney's statement, your bills might go down by a third. We don't know exactly how he thinks he would be able to do it, but it doesn't sound to me as if we could be in any worse position being independent.
We've quite strongly campaigned for much more that can be done in Scotland with the powers of devolution. But clearly, if we were independent, we could do even more. We just take the line that you shouldn't wait until you can do everything till you start doing the things you can do. But yeah, as an independent country, there is a lot more that we could do, and even despite everything we've talked about.
There's another thing that Mr. Swinney, I've heard him saying. He refers to a government. I'm not sure if it won't be tariff that he said, but it sounds like some sort of payment that Westminster is putting on to the energy producers that then they're just passing on to us. And he keeps saying how that should be taken off. So I understand that's a really bad explanation of what it is he's talking about. But do you know what it is he's talking about?
There are a few examples of this. The prominent one is actually one that Fiona had on the screen there, talking renewables obligation, the ECO, the energy company obligation. Now, this it comes to an end in a couple of months, a scheme whereby energy producers paid money into a pot that got divvied, that householders could apply to get energy efficiency measures like solar panels, heat pumps, extra insulation. I tried to get it for my house here. We didn't qualify for a couple of reasons. Now that scheme is coming to an end, and what that means is the companies will no longer be paying into that pot, but they'll also no longer be charging our energy bills for that amount, because they pass everything on to us in the end. What appears to be happening now is the successor scheme, the Warmer Homes Initiative, which will start up at some point over this year, will be paid for out of general taxation. So again, it's this idea that they've taken this lump of money off our electricity bills, but it's probably going to come back in tax somewhere. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean everybody's getting an income tax increase, because you can target this in different ways. If they were playing smart, they might just add an extra windfall tax onto the fossil fuel producers to pay for this scheme instead, especially now with prices going up. So it's a different way of getting that money in, but it will take it off the bills. It might even be that we end up paying it back out of income tax at the end, but it's coming out of a different budget line, so we don't notice, which is maybe what the politicians hope. But yeah, you see quite a few of these schemes feeding in through the bills, and it would be good if we had a much more transparent way of seeing all those little slices of additions onto each bill. I have to say that eco obligation was a good scheme. And it did do a lot of good. Didn't do enough. It wasn't funded enough, and it wasn't rolling out fast enough. And we've got entire policy papers on how you do home insulation better. But it was better than not having something. And keep paying very close attention to the successor scheme to make sure it goes even further.
Energy is ours. These were the words I heard again and again last month when I was in the Faroe Islands, from politicians, from CEOs, and from ordinary people. Energy is ours. And so I'd like to tell you a pity story. The Faroes are a small Nordic island group at 62 degrees north, a population of just over 50,000 people, and yet they have more autonomy than Scotland does. Let that sink in. A population of 50,000 people with more autonomy than Scotland. And guess what? They're thriving. The Faroes have 100% community-owned wind farms. Every profit, every penny goes back into their communities, investing in innovation, in grid resilience, and in infrastructure. Their wind farms are small, dispersed and integrated. Their national energy company sees it as their job to keep prices low and affordable. When I was there recently, I asked the CEO how many people in the Faroe Islands are in fuel poverty. And he looked genuinely confused back at me, and he thought it was a trick question. He told me, Anna Mary, I don't understand. Because here's the thing. Fuel poverty doesn't exist in Faroes. Now compare that to my home, the Shetland Islands. We host one of the largest onshore wind farms in the whole of Europe, privately owned, 103 turbines across the spine of Shetland, frequently curtailed, and 25% of our community is in fuel poverty. The very wind that creates profit for Viking Energy is the same wind that leaves too many Shetlanders struggling to heat their homes. And this is a story told many times over Scotland. Something doesn't add up. Something is deeply broken. These are political choices. These are Westminster choices. Successive UK governments choosing to prioritise corporations over communities again and again and again.
This is Jackson Carlaw bemoaning the fact that he's only got a park bench out of their local wind farm.
Since Mr Golden has been kind enough to reference my constituency and the Whiteleys wind farm, of which actually we're all immensely proud, and it's been an interesting journey because I think it is in some ways typical that I can remember very fierce objections to it from the community, and yet anybody born during the lifetime of its existence simply accepts the fact that it is there. And I suppose community benefit I might also define in the incredible leisure opportunities that have been provided in the precincts of the wind farm with the visitor centre, the bike trails and all the other opportunities, and it's very, very widely used. Having said that, the community benefit, which Mr Golden said would all go to Eaglesome and Waterfoot, was very much what the people of Eaglesome and Waterfoot thought. As a resident of Waterfoot, can I say we're very proud of our park bench, which appears to be the only community benefit we received, because the council then moved in and decided it would assume the responsibility for the benefit. So it now goes to the entire council area, including parts of the Levendale Valley, Barhead, Upland and Neilson, who don't see the Whiteleys wind farm like the people of Castlemilk. So sometimes, as you say, I think it is the case that the benefit might be quite widely spread, and there is a suspicion in some that the council then starts to use the benefit to subsidise core spending within the council, as opposed to the incremental benefit that I think many people hoped and thought that the effect, the consequence of having the site on board would be.
What you've just described is something that I think is actually part of the problem of the community buy-in to any of these the infrastructure or these developments, because they don't see it. And we, I'm almost like becoming like a broken record. We're no longer in the realms of painting the scout hut or putting football strips into the school football team. It has to be substantial and meaningful community benefit that's actually going to improve that community. And I believe very strongly that it should be the community that decides how it is spent.
Do you think that's the case? Because it seems to me that if you've got a benefit that's going to the whole council, so everybody benefits, is that not a good thing? Why should it only be a town and a community that benefits? I don't know. What do you think?
I've seen this happen in my own area, where it was similar. The local authority took command of a lot of the community benefits that were coming in and widely dispersed them across the whole authority. There were also a lot of unusual restrictions in previous years over where communities could bid for capital funding but not revenue funding. Mm-hmm. So they could bid for funds to build or renovate or buy a community hall, but then they couldn't afford to run it. There were weird restrictions in past years, like you couldn't use the funding to put solar panels on the school because it would be revenue generating, and that was apparently illegal.
They didn't let you pay salaries for support workers, but you could have the building to put the support worker in, but you couldn't afford them.
In more recent years, we have seen the developers negotiate more directly with local communities and set up funds that the communities can bid directly into. But again, in my area, there are funds here that are undersubscribed. They've got quite a whack of cash that they want to give out to, but not enough projects to give the money to. And that itself is a symptom of the lack of local democracy in Scotland. And the very big disparities in some communities, where you might have a community that has a really good community council and a development trust and really active people in the community who can think of interesting things to do with this money. And then you might have other areas that don't have any of that, and they're still looking at the turbines and not getting the benefit that's due from them. But there is a broader question that it's not just at a local authority level where, yeah, sure, I live in an area where there are a very high density of renewable energy developments, but someone in the middle of Glasgow doesn't just not have them, but can't have them. Right? So how is it fair that I get all of this wealth and someone in the towns doesn't?
It's a tricky one, depending what your perspective is in the situation, isn't it? So what do you think would be the fairest or the best way of structuring it?
I'm going to say it again, nationalise the lot. or at least mutualise it. So one of the ways that we've talked about as a way of bringing energy into public ownership, if the government doesn't want to do it or can't do it, we set up a mutual company where we, the customers, we, the residents of Scotland, each own a share in that company. And then we have a say in how it's run. But we also get a dividend from the profits. Yeah. So that would more widely spread the benefit of all of Scotland's renewables. We would all get our dividend payment.
I like that idea. Basis. The groups of people whose glen is being filled with batteries and pylons have got an additional argument to say, how come, that's probably down to that thing you mentioned before about the strategy of the rollout, because it isn't fair that somebody should have their entire, environment ruined.
Partly, and it's not mutually exclusive. You could have a system where 80% of the generated the wind farm is owned by the national company, the national mutual, and 20% is owned by a community-owned development company, and they get their profits directly, and that could be a good balance of both worlds in that. Now, there's something there that you mentioned that's actually quite useful to pick up on, is the batteries. Community benefit is going through a bit of a change in Scotland right now. Up until a couple of months ago, the policy was that a wind turbine would attract £5,000 per megawatt that would be given to the local community via these community benefit funds. The Scottish Government has recently upped that to £6,000. Now, that's an increase in cash terms. It's actually a decrease in real terms. If you look at inflation since the £5,000 benchmark came in, if that had increased by inflation, it would be closer to 7,500 now.
It was a minimum of 5,000, wasn't it?
It's a voluntary sum. It's a minimum recommended sum. Now, you say voluntary. In practice, if you're a wind company and you go in and say, we want to develop this park and we're not giving the community anything, you'll just be refused planning permission. So it's voluntary with quotes. Although the Ferret had a recent article showing that there were companies that were paying less than the minimum, to the tune of about £50 million over the last several years. But yeah, we do have this increase for the wind side. But up until now, there was no recommended benchmark for solar panels or for batteries or for pylons, although that's a different thing as well, because pylons aren't inherently revenue generating. Now, the government has now put in benchmarks for solar power and for batteries, but they're at a much lower rate than the wind turbines. And as I say, solar panels are the big revolution, and battery storage is the big thing that has to come in to balance out the grid. So it's a bit disappointing that we're not getting more out of that from the community benefit side. The big problem again is the community benefit, even with the increased rates, is still a pittance. It's still almost nothing compared to what communities would bring in if they owned the generators themselves. There was a study, quite a widely quoted study now, that found that community-owned wind turbines in Scotland returned 34 times as much revenue to their local community as a community benefit fund would.
Wow.
34 times.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's going to get spent in that community as well, a lot of it, isn't it? It's not going to go offshore.
Yeah, there's a proposal for a solar farm next to my village that's going to be so large that if the community was allowed to buy 10% of it, it would generate more electricity than the entire village could use. Just that 10%.
So is that something that could be made part of the planning permission thing? So, but X amount has to be owned by the community.
I have seen a plan, and it's quite a good one, where if we're not brave enough to do the Denmark 20%, then I have seen plans floated where you could do a mandatory 8% for communities and then give communities the right to buy in a further 12, taking it up to 20 if they want. The problem there is, where do communities get that money? We do have proposals for local authority borrowing, or for the SNIB, the Scottish National Investment Bank, to invest in these things. But again, we're just coming round and round back to that point of, is it not better just nationalising and mutualising the whole thing? If we do that, we're not tweaking the edges, looking for a few more pennies than we'd otherwise get.
Thank you so much for spending the last hour with us. It's been, as always, enjoyable, and I think some of it will sink in over the course of the next few hours. My brain will start to absorb it. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me.
Oh, great.
Hope you found that useful. Don't forget, we will be back probably in a couple of weeks with the follow-up programme with Gordon McIntyre Kemp's campaign, which probably most of us have taken part in, if you're watching this. Also, some proposals that are starting to emerge about particularly the link between the cost of gas and the cost of electricity, which we're going to be watching very carefully, because that could make a big difference very quickly.
Good. So more about that in a couple of weeks. Yes, over to you, Mr. Swinney.
Just over the North Sea, a very different story is being told. Norway, with the full powers of independence, has been able to use its energy resources, its oil and gas wealth, to build an economy and a society that is wealthier and fairer than the United Kingdom. Norway has put in place strong financial foundations and economic underpinning that means each and every Norwegian has a more secure future than people in Scotland. It's a story of wealth and opportunity achieved because Norway's energy was in Norway's hands. But just like oil and renewables-rich Norway, Scotland has been blessed twice. We may have missed out on the full benefit of our oil and gas bonanza, but with our vast, low-cost renewable energy resource, Scotland has the second chance to get it right. A second chance to repair the damage being done right now by a Westminster approach that serves London and the South East, while happily sacrificing Scotland and our North East. You, like me, will have heard people from the islands and the Highlands to Galloway and the South West asking, why more wind farms? Why more pylons? When the energy being generated is doing so little for Scotland as it flows once again down south, and we face sky-high energy costs. We produce energy in surplus, but the folly of UK energy policy even serves to turn the fundamental economics on their head. A surplus of low-cost energy in Scotland should mean, and must mean, not ever higher bills, but low-cost energy for the people of Scotland for good. An energy-rich Scotland should mean, must mean, energy-rich Scots. We know what is possible. We can see it just across the North Sea in Norway. Let's not miss this second opportunity to transform our nation. Let's not let Westminster take the decisions and also take Scotland's wealth. Because it is Scotland's energy, it is Scotland's opportunity.
Thanks for listening, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that. If you want to make sure you're following us and subscribe to us, then you get notified every time we put something new out, so you don't miss anything. That would be great. Also, you can click the little bell if you're watching on YouTube.
And sign up for our mailing list. You can do that from the website, and we always send one out at the beginning of each month to tell you what's happening. Last but not least, you can buy us a coffee on coffee.com.